Thank you all. Let's move now to our next speaker, and David, John Rep is going to introduce our next speaker.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Stephen Bezruchka grew up in Canada and got his medical degree at Stanford in 1973. Spent over 10 years in Nepal setting up a community health project, which there was a week's walk from the road. He also developed a remote hospital into a teaching hospital for Nepali doctors, and he worked with Nepalis to provide health care in remote areas. He also wrote a very popular guidebook on trekking. When he returned to the US, he worked in Seattle as an emergency room doctor. He went back to school at Johns Hopkins to study public health in the early 1990s. Now teaches at the University of Washington School of Public Health. He works to sad fact that our life expectancy ranks behind many other 44th at the best measure now, behind China and Thailand, as well as other rich nations. Excuse me, in the 50s, we were one of the healthiest nations. So what happened? What produces health in the country? And I want to say that I got an advanced copy of his new book, Inequality Kills Us All. And anyway, it's like a graduate course in public health. So thank you. Well, I'm so happy to present my friend, Dr. Stephen Bezruchka.
Well, thank you very much, John, and thank you for WWFOR for having me speak today. And at the risk of committing PowerPoint malpractice, I'm going to show a number of visuals, and I'm also going to try and present a different perspective on violence than the one that you typically consider in the Fellowship of Reconciliation. And I'd be happy to stop at any time so you can ask questions. So please feel free to ask questions at any time. And if I've done this correctly, you are seeing a single screen, is that right? Anybody not seeing a
Yes.
Okay, good. So I've titled this Inequality is Killing Us, and I'll come along to explain that. Excuse me. And as has been pointed out, we sit on stolen sacred lands, and where I am in West Seattle, it's the Duwamish tribe, an unrecognized federal tribe that is the main land that we stole. So I want to say a little more than John did about who I am. He talked about my going to Nepal, and I went there in 1969 between graduate school and medical school. And I'd befriended somebody who was working for USAID and family planning in Nepal, and he gave me boxes of condoms and told me to distribute them in the hills. Well, I wasn't going to demonstrate how to use them, so I blew them up as balloons for kids, and they would play with these. They play volleyball in these amazing mountain environments. Well, I spent pretty well a year there and went on to write the first trekking guidebook to the country. And this is the 8th edition that came out in 2011, the last edition since I'm too lame to to do much of that activity anymore. As John said, I went back in the 1970s, a week's walk from the road, and set up a community health project. And I tried to use a simple technology and train local people locally. So I'm on the left teaching Pema on the right to cut skin grafts with a razor blade. Razor blades are pretty simple technology and actually quite effective. I then went on, as John said, to set up a district hospital as a teaching hospital, and again, using simple technology in those environments, such as open drop ether anesthesia. You don't need much in the way of fancy gadgets, and it's quite effective and safe. I then got over the years obsessed with the kind of ideas I'm going to present today, and I tried to reach as many different audiences as I could. And so here I am on Democracy Now! A while back talking about these ideas. I try to do TED Talks. Here's one I did at the University of Washington a few years back. And this is my wife and son and daughter a few years ago as well. So I want to talk about our health status and how it compares to other countries. Ask the question, what produces health in a society? Suggest that inequality kills, that early life is really important, and then talk about forms of violence that we need to overcome that's different from the one that FORs usually talk about. And I want to suggest that the life of modern people is chasing the Almighty into an early grave. So to present that idea, some years ago I coined the term Health Olympics. Suppose health were an Olympic event. Remember, countries compete in Olympic events. And the race was how long you lived, average length of life. So I call this the Health Olympics, and I'd like you to respond in the chat. Let me just preface this by saying that we spend on healthcare almost as much as the rest of the world combined. So that should buy us something. Would anybody give us the gold medal in the chat? Anybody put us in the top 5 in length of life? So I find it hard to monitor the chat to see. I don't see anybody right now. How about raising your hands? Can you do that? If you would put us, say, in the top 15 countries, anybody would put us in the top 15 countries in length of life? I can't see everybody, but I don't see anybody. I think John gave it away. How about on the right side? Are we somewhere between 16th to 30th in terms of how we would compare with other countries in our life expectancy? Well, I'm trying to monitor the. Oh, I see a hand waving. Good. All right. I see a couple of other hands raised. How many would put us below 30? 31 or below? I see more hands. Okay. Well, I guess I'm not fooling you. So this is the running of the Health Olympics in 2021. I get the data from the United Nations Human Development Report, the report published in September, and Table 1 gives all the UN countries and their life expectancies. So I've just graphed the top 45. And in the UN list of countries, which avoids Taiwan and small populations such as Monaco and others, there are 43 countries with longer lives. So I want us to look at this chart in some critical way. First of all, we are about 7.5 years life expectancy years behind the longest lived country, Japan. So is that just a few more years drooling in a nursing home? What does that represent? Well, most of us can't answer that question. And if you read about this in the newspapers or other media, they don't try to help you see what those 7.5 years really mean. But our leading disease killers have been heart disease, cancer, and then COVID. And if we eradicated all three of our top disease killers, we would gain about 7 years. We would be close to Japan, but still not the longest lived country in the world. So I would suggest that this is a huge health gap. So let's ask the question. And the other thing was back in the 1950s, the life expectancy numbers were lower. That is, we're living longer lives than we used to. But back in the 1950s, we were somewhere in the top 5. So what's happened is that other countries have seen more rapid improvements in health than we have. So anybody want to speculate on why this is the case? Why do we die younger than people in at least 43 other countries? And if we add in other nations, it's closer to 50 or 60. Anybody want to, Debbie Blaine, do you want to suggest why we die so young?
I think it has, in my opinion, to do with the fact that other countries are not healthcare for profit, but they're healthcare for health. And we're healthcare for profit.
So that raises the important question, what does healthcare do for health? And I'll address that a little later. Anybody else want to venture a reason?
There are several comments in the chat that the reasons might be guns, the standard American diet, or obesity.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, please monitor the chat because it's hard for me to
Hard
do.
to do that and speak, yeah.
Good. So, okay, so diet and obesity and guns. Let's take a behavior that I hope not too many of you engage in and think is bad for your health. Let's take smoking cigarettes, just as a personal behavior. Out of all the countries on this list, which country has the lowest proportion of men smoking cigarettes?
Mm. No idea.
Well, it's the United States and Sweden, on the opposite ends of this list. About 15% of men smoke cigarettes in the United States or Sweden. Which country on this list has the highest proportion of men smoking cigarettes? Anybody been to Japan? About
Yes.
45% of men smoke cigarettes in Japan. So if I told you that's the reason Japan's so healthy, they all smoke, you'd be well advised to tune me out. But it does suggest that a bad personal health related behavior like cigarette smoking does not explain this. And that's where I hope we go. Okay, so this is really tough stuff. So our life expectancy has been declining. And at the end of August, the New York Times ran a front page story about how much our life expectancy is declining. And they didn't talk about what that difference means, but that's the big failing that the media don't report how the health consequences of that life expectancy drop. So the United Nations, I told you I took my data from the United Nations Human Development Report, And in the report, this is the cover of it. Uncertain times, unsettled lives shaping our future in a transforming world. That is the most downbeat title of a UN Human Development report ever. They're usually much more upbeat. And I'm going to show you now table 1 from that report with the Health Olympics for the 190 UN countries. And you can see there's United States at 44th. And so all of those other countries, people have longer lives, not just the rich countries, but poorer ones such as Slovenia or Thailand, Chile, and so on. Now, the United States is made up of about 3,000 counties. And if we draw a map of US county life expectancy, this is for 2019, where the red is the lowest life expectancy down around 65 or 4, and the purple and the deep blue is over 91 years. You can see the range of health outcomes, and we're looking at a 25, 26-year difference in life expectancy among US counties. And the red, the lowest life expectancy, you see there in the upper Midwest, in the southern part of South Dakota, and the deepest red are in Lakota, Oglala County, where Pine Ridge Indian Reservation is located. And that's the lowest life expectancy in the country. And the dark blue you can see not too far away in a couple of counties in Colorado, where Aspen and Breckenridge are located. And then you can see the Mississippi Valley with a lot of poor health, Tennessee and West Virginia. So this is the distribution of county life expectancy in 2019. The next graph will show these using the same color scheme, life expectancy in 2014 on the right and 2019 on the left. And what you see is the blue is disappearing and the orange and redder colors are appearing. So this points out very graphically the decrease in life expectancy over that 5-year period in a lot of US counties. And most of us are unaware of what has been happening. Well, if we just take that was to 2019, let's take the changes from 2019 to 2021 for a bunch of rich countries, and we're in red there seeing the biggest decline, the continuous decline, and the other countries not so much of a decline, and from 2020 to 21, mostly a rebound. So again, it's highlighting our, dying young in a big way. And who's dying young within the country? So these are ethnic life expectancies for Asian, Latinx, white, black, and American natives from 2019 to 2021. And again, American Indians are seeing the biggest decline, and that's really pretty devastating. So I hate to say we're dead first, but that's what all the evidence portrays. We die younger than people in so many other countries. So that breaches the question, what determines health in a population? Earlier we talked about healthcare. We talked about guns and diet, and I presented smoking as a factor that doesn't explain this. So let's go to Minnesota, one of our healthier states, and it has a graphic in its report to the Department of Health in 2014, a pie chart listing what are the important factors in leading to health outcomes. And notice that clinical care, medical care, amounts to about 10%, social and economic factors, almost half of the pie, and personal behaviors, less than social and economic factors.
Mm.
Any questions so far? Well, our healthiest state is Hawaii. Longest lived, some of the lowest mortality rates. And they produced this report by the Department of Health in Hawaii back in 2011. And they have a graphic that you see there that I want us to inspect on the left, and that's on page 2 of the report. And what do they put? Let's just go back and see. So we have downstream effects, Makai, and Mauka upstream, root causes. And they produce this graphic because Hawaii is a pretty mountainous state and people there can relate to it. So what's downstream? What are the downstream effects that produce health? So, here's the river entering the ocean, and in the ocean are most of the chronic diseases that you either have now and try and deal with, or you will have as you age. So that's what results are various diseases. Above that, on the shore, you see risk factors. So again, downstream, smoking, obesity, physical inactivity. Yeah, again, not so important. They're downstream. And what does Hawaii put on the other side of the river? Healthcare. Again, downstream. Something's going on in Hawaii in which they don't think healthcare is such a big deal. And here's a graph to illustrate that. So this is, how can you measure healthcare? Well, one thing is the amount of money we spend on healthcare. In the United States, a sixth of our economy, 18%, all $4 trillion is spent on healthcare. So this is a graph of healthcare spending over the 20-year period from 1995 to 2015 in purchasing power adjusted dollars. So each dollar has the same. And here are 10 countries up above, and this is the United States. We spend a huge amount of money, and the vertical axis is life expectancy. And this is Japan, longest lived country. They spend less than half of what we do per capita on healthcare, and these are a number of other rich countries. And notice by 2015, our life expectancy is still below where Japan was in 1995. So we're pretty far behind. So I worked clinically as a doctor for 35 years, and this graphic is really what medical care is all about. We healthcare workers are busy mopping up the floor. We can't keep up with the flow. What needs to be done? Anybody?
Turn off the faucet.
Turn off the faucet, exactly. Whose job is that in this country? No one's. This is such a lucrative economy, healthcare, that nobody wants to turn off the faucet and give us less work to do, because that would not be so good. So healthcare isn't that important. Here's the raging waterfall. What's what are there on either side of the waterfall are what are termed the social determinants of health: discrimination, racism, poverty, pollution, education, income, wealth, crime, safety, housing, all that sort of stuff. So what's above that? So that's really important for Hawaiians. What's above that? Root causes. Well, socioeconomic conditions. And what's above that? Political context and governance. Somehow, Hawaii sees politics as the root cause of health outcomes. So we can actually consider political determinants of health as the main factors that produce health in a society. They can be corporate, commercial, social, and economic, but it all comes down to politics. So to summarize, health has been improving most of the last century. It's a remarkable situation. These improvements are not shared equally, whether it's within a country, such as Colorado versus South Dakota, or American Indians versus those of Asian descent, or United States versus Japan. Poorer people have poorer health. And if you remember nothing else, that's the key message to remember. And let's take an example, the Titanic. Suppose you had a first-class ticket on the Titanic. Turns out 60% survived. Second class, 40%. Third class or crew, a quarter survived. So always get a first-class ticket in any situation. It'll lead to better survival. All I'm saying here is there's a socioeconomic gradient, and outcomes are always better for those who have more. Well, another way of looking at it is to consider the gradient measured by income. The more income inequality we have, the more problems we have. And so let's take as an example, because I'm entirely data driven, let's take COVID deaths by US state. These are US states and COVID deaths in 2020, and more equal states had fewer deaths. Income inequality leads to a variety of different circumstances that produce worse health. So there's a real strong relationship between income inequality or other measures of inequality and the health of populations. And it's kind of like global warming. That is, the income gap is invisible. The effects are delayed. Change is gradual. It's like the frog in boiling water that was described. The change is over there, not here, and it's hidden in data. So inequality is bad for us, and so that's the first idea. It's like a toxic gas. It's invisible, it's odorless, colorless, it's killing us, and we're not aware of it. And I call that the toxic gas of inequality. The next idea, early life lasts a lifetime. And that relates to the life cycle model. You start in diapers, you go to Disneyland, rock and roll, masturbation, sex, marriage, career. I've had my colonoscopy. I've had my. I'm facing retirement. I'm drooling, confusion. I'll be back in diapers soon. It's before you go to Disneyland where your health is really important, and it starts with conception. And you live in a womb with a view. You're searching for information about the outside world, and if it's a hostile world, then you're going to program yourself to be able to survive. So as we go from the erection to the resurrection, It's that early part, soon after you're conceived, and by age 2, when roughly half of your health as an adult is programmed. A student of mine came up with this graphic, the first 1,000 days, from conception to the time you're blowing out 2 candles on your second birthday, roughly half of your health as an adult has already been programmed. Racism is a real big player in this. And with my students now, I have to present, if I'm going to show you a 1-minute video, and I have to give you a trigger warning. Namely, this is sensitive material, so be forewarned.
Which doll is the black doll? And which one is the white doll?
That one.
Which doll is the pretty doll? Which doll is the nice doll? Which doll is the bad doll? Which doll is the nice doll? And which doll is the bad doll? And why is that doll pretty?
Because she's white and she has 2 eyes.
Which doll is the ugly doll? Why is that doll ugly?
Because he's black.
Which doll looks most like you?
Like me.
Yeah, which one looks like you?
And that one.
Okay.
That doll.
You know, I've shown this thousands of times, and it's still tough for me to watch. But this is an example of racism. And what kind of racism is this depicting? Does anybody want to share what they think of this kind of racism? By the way, these kinds of studies were first done at Clark University in the 1930s. They led to the Brown versus the Board of Education Supreme Court ruling in 1954, and they've been repeated many times, and they depict internalized racism. These African American children already know where they stand in society. And then there's besides structural racism, there's externalized racism, the typical kind, and structural racism. So racism has a profound effect on health. And one example is maternal mortality. And we're seeing the racialized effects increase. So this is deaths in childbirth by race, just showing the increase from 2007 to 2011. And maternal mortality in this country is actually going up 50% over the last 15 years. And the rate is about 4 times higher in African American women. So racism has a profound effect on our health, not just the health of Black people, but also the rest of us. How about another statistic? We consume about 3/4 of the world's opioids in this country. And opioid deaths are a huge issue. So here we are leading the world in opioid deaths in 2017, and a graph among countries showing our escalation of opioid deaths up to 2013. And the COVID pandemic has increased drug overdose deaths profoundly. So this is how we are coping. We are coping with the sense of despair in this country by killing ourselves with drug overdoses. Why might we be doing this? Well, studies suggest we have more pain in this country than in other rich countries. And pain comes in two flavors: physical pain and social pain. And um, drugs for pain work on both forms, and opioids do a very good job. I'm not going to speak much about gender inequality, but I think you'll appreciate this graphic depicting it. So we live in a patriarchy, and that causes a lot of problems. Now, I bet you're sitting out there thinking, well, this is all interesting stuff, but it doesn't affect me because I'm white, I'm highly educated, I make lots of money, so surely it doesn't apply to me. I see my doctor. But if we look at this Institute of Medicine report published in 2013 with the title U.S. Health in International Perspective, Shorter Lives, Poorer Health, notice the title there says everything. And they point out very clearly that all of us are impacted by these ideas. So what are we going to do? You know, I presented all this bad news, and I want to show what needs to be done. So I want to look at healthcare expenditures and another kind of expenditure called social expenditures, not on healthcare. Elizabeth Bradley and her colleagues at Yale looked at how much countries spend on social factors versus how much they spend on healthcare and divided the two. Social services divided by healthcare, and there's the usual suspects among the countries. And we spend more than twice as much on healthcare than we do on social expenditures. And what kind of expenditures might these be? Well, paid leave, for example. Only 2 countries in the world don't have a federally mandated program that give a working woman who's pregnant paid time off after she has her baby. One is, of course, the United States, and the other is Papua New Guinea, half of a big island north of Australia. Sweden gives you 444 days of paid leave at your full pay. Up in Canada, you get 60. You get a year at 60% of your full pay. The employer tops it up, but we can't afford it. Other countries have strong childcare, social supports, better sickness, free education, living wage, so many of these. So Hawaii says politics really is important for health. And let's look into this, again, looking at our measure life expectancy. And this time, rather than counties, as we saw on the maps, let's look at states. And so this is a graph of trends in state life expectancies from 1958 to 2017. And the brown states have liberal state policies, and the green states have conservative state policies. That is, the political policies tend towards liberal domains and the conservative domains. And without going into too much detail, these are examples that were studied there. Issues of education and gun control and abortion and taxing and others, LGBTQ rights, and so on. So states that have liberal policies have significant life expectancy gains. Remember, the conservative states have almost little or no life expectancy gains starting somewhere in the 1980s, whereas liberal states have continued to see health improvements. So we can say that liberal policies lead to better health for both men and women among states. And a lot of it has to do with policy, with their choices on how much policy they create. And I'm blocking on his name right now. Robert Reich, who was Clinton's Secretary of Labor, pointed out very clearly poverty is a policy choice. How much policy we have, and among rich countries, we have the most poverty, and that's our choice. We seem to want to produce poverty. How do we get around that? Well, one thing is to have an economic democracy. You know, we have a democracy in terms of choosing our leaders, but not in choosing issues at our workplace. So I'm a strong believer in democracy in the workplace, such as in the Pike Place Market, the place where they throw the fish. It was sold to their employees a few years back. So employee ownership is an important way to have economic democracy. So the Fellowship of Reconciliation is all about nonviolence, right? And I applaud you, and I want to consider violence. All I've heard about violence that you talk about is behavioral violence, wars and killings and things like that. And I want to suggest there are other kinds of violence that I call structural violence, violence due to the structure of society. Behavioral violence is discrete, it's individual. There's a smoking gun. Not true for structural violence. The inequality created in society, it's like the toxic gas of inequality. It kills us. There's no discrete event, nobody pulling the trigger, and it's invisible. So what's the amount, let's consider the different amounts of violence, the behavioral and the structural kind. Well, calculations, I'm just using 1997 because I have the calculations. Structural violence in the United States was about 4% of all the deaths, worldwide 18% of all the deaths. And that was just in 1 year. Structural violence, the deaths due to inequality. If we take the war deaths in the last century in the United States, 500,000. Worldwide, 110 million. That's for a whole century. And so in 1 year, there's a tenth of that for the world in structural violence deaths. A variety of ways of depicting this. I could present the World Trade Towers collapse. That was 3,000 deaths. That's behavioral violence. Structural violence is like the trade towers collapsing every 2 hours, just to give you a sense of the magnitude of it all. So John mentioned my book, and I'm going to, here we go, let's see. Inequality kills us all, and in the hopes that well, let's see, I want to put it in the chat, but I'll do it a little bit later. Oh, here it is. Okay, so here are details about the Inequality Kills Us All book. It goes into great detail in all of this, and it tells you what to do and a variety of individual behavior issues. Frederick Douglass, an escaped slave and abolitionist, said 150 years ago, it's easier to build strong children than to repair broken men. But we have a huge economy. Our healthcare industry repairing broken men and women. And I'm suggesting that we don't want to tamper with that. How are we going to build strong children? Well, a couple of things. We need to care for one another. We need to share with one another, and we need to repair for the sins of our forefathers. And to delve into this, let's have a parental leave program. Let Papua New Guinea be the only country without a national parental leave program. Let's have a free child care like they do in well, minimal cost. In Quebec, in Canada, child care is $8 a day. In Sweden, it's free. And in this country, it's very expensive. My students have enormous amounts of debt. So college is free in most other rich countries. And of course, we should have health care for all. So that's the element of caring. How about sharing? Well, we should tax wealth. We should have a pay ratio between the highest and lowest paid worker in an industry be 10 to 1, like it was back in the 1950s and 60s, not the 500 to 1,000 and to 1 it is now. We should go back to the ideas of Henry George, who was a leading economist in the 19th century, and Georgism said we should not have people who get unearned income. That's called rents. Finally, we need to repair for the sins of our forefathers. And I want to take William Darity's program of reparations, to take excess wealth among whites today and transfer it to African Americans who had at least one slave ancestor to eradicate the racial wealth gap. You know, blacks have about $20,000 in wealth on and if they have that much, and whites have close to $200,000 in wealth in this country. So what are we going to do? Well, I can tell you what I do. I teach. I give, teach undergrads, and I've taught courses to retirees, given online courses. I write for the popular press as much as I can, give talks, and I'm on the board of Washington Physicians for Social Responsibility, and we have a health, an inequity health task force, and most members are not doctors, so it's something you could consider joining. So what have I said? Well, I think this book by Jeffrey Rose called The Strategy of Preventive Medicine, published in 1992. I want to read you the last paragraph. And he's a Brit, so he uses British meanings for words. The primary determinants of disease are mainly economic and social, and therefore its remedies must also be economic and social. Medicine and politics cannot and should not be kept apart. We must recognize that health is political. So I've said our health is now declining. The causes are increasing economic inequality, the lack of attention to early life, and medical care is a minor player in the process. What do we need? Well, we need to create awareness, and we need to recognize the political nature of health production and get involved politically. So I bet I presented some ideas that many of you had not considered before. And I bet most of you can recall a time when you learned something and believed it with absolute fervor and later found it to be untrue. Can you recall a time like that? Anybody? I'll give you a hint.
Oh, Santa Claus.
That's right. Neil got over that. So take these ideas to heart and see if you can get over them. So here's my email. I'm happy to engage with any of you on this ideas or anything else. And I thank you for the opportunity to talk and happy to engage in discussion.
Thank you, Stephen. We can have some questions if anyone has any questions.
I see a hand up. Jean Moust.
Actually, that was a thumbs up because I really appreciated this presentation. It's eye-opening and we need to hear it over and over and we need to move on it. Thank you.
Thank you. And yes, we won't move on it until we create enough awareness. We dropped 2 bombs on Japan, and so everybody knew there was something in nuclear power. The Russians launched a satellite, and we were told about that. But we're not made aware of our being dead first. So creating awareness is really the challenge. Yeah, what is your explanation of the apparently low levels of support for in the southern and midwestern states? Yeah, the Medicaid expansion makes the lack of the government, the federal government, picking up the tab for Medicaid expansion. There's an attitude of, who uses Medicaid? The poor. And there's an attitude throughout much of the country that the poor brought it on themselves because they didn't work hard enough. Why should we give them handouts? Why should we expand access to health care? We live in a meritocracy and, you get what you work hard to achieve. Well, of course, that's not true. But nevertheless, that is very much the prevailing belief, especially in the Southeast, where people who get welfare benefits are thought to have jumped the queue and got in front of others. And I'll make my slide deck available. Yes, I'm very happy to do that. Somebody else, Bernie or David?
Yes, I was, thank you very much, Stephen. I was very struck by the epidemic of overdose in this country, overdose deaths, and in recent years, increasingly, and the level of pain, psychological, physical pain. I work in mental health. I supervise a lot of people, and every day I hear about people dying of fentanyl, meth, you name it, and people with schizophrenia and bipolar and so forth are dealing with dual disorders. It's just astounding. And I had no idea that the United States was so top heavy in terms of the amount of worldwide of this addiction.
Yeah, I think a lot of it has to do, studies suggest that there's more pain in this country. We no longer are an industrial society, so it's mostly not workplace injuries or that kind of pain. it's social pain. And even acetaminophen, Tylenol, in experimental studies will treat social pain. But of course, the opioids do it much, much better. And they're freely available. I mean, Big Pharma was taken to task for telling doctors that you can't get addicted to these opioids when in fact they knew that wasn't true. But people seek them out anyway. And delivery can be Uberized. It's so easy to get, whether you get them in a prescription or somewhere else, and they relieve pain very well. There's a concept called deaths of despair,
Mm.
and it's prevalent among white people, of poorer white people who didn't achieve the American dream. That is, you're supposed to have made it rich by the time you're in your 50s, and they consume a lot of alcohol to try and deal with their having failed in the American dream, and opioids and other conditions like that, and suicide. Suicide rates are going up in this country uh, among the young and among uh, poorer whites as well. So, the American dream is a nightmare, and you got to be asleep to be able to achieve the American dream.
Thank you.
Bernie?
Thank you so much, Stephen. That concretizes so much for me when I go between the lines in my study of violence, which started concertedly in the first Gulf War. But I want to ask a question because we have a very strong time limitation. And the question is, people like Noam Chomsky, and I agree with him, have been emphasizing human created violence in terms of nuclear weapons and in terms of climate change. Our days are strongly numbered because of those human creations. And I think at least I need to coordinate the ideas that you presented so clearly with those two realities. What's your response?
Yeah, I mean, we are, the global climate crisis could certainly end the existence of humans in our current form, and the nuclear threat is huge. Um, our being dead first is somewhat less important, although most of us in this country prefer being alive rather than dead. Uh, I would say that if we were to deal with the climate crisis, what needs to be done around the world. I mean, the COP out 26 meetings in Egypt, the poor countries said, listen, you're the guys, the rich countries are the ones who created this crisis, and you're denying us our rights for dealing with it. We need global sharing in that regard. We need to scale down our lifestyle, and we need uh, at least equitable economic growth in poor countries, and the reliance on fossil fuels has to stop. But the current situation, fossil fuels are having an absolute field day. What we need really is to teach critical thinking skills. If I think about it, in my courses, the students, what I want is for them to object to what I'm saying. I want them to think critically about what I'm saying. In fact, I tell them, if the ideas I present is really are important to you, don't believe a single word I said. Go and figure it out for yourself. because that's, you know, or do it collectively. So I give my students population health web rambles. They have to go to other sources instead of being told what I presented in this talk. And then they have to find trustworthy sources and evaluate them. So yes, the climate crisis is paramount, and the nuclear threat we're closer to now than we have been for a long time. I'm looking at the chat. The lack of attention to the costs of militarism and the existence. Well, you know, who's laughing about our sending more weapons to Ukraine? It's the military industrial complex. I mean, you know, the purveyors of arms is a huge industry in this country, and the government gives the military, increases the military budget more than what is asked for. And most of us, you know, it's $1 trillion a year. Most of us are unaware of that, and you know, we are in fact hastening our demise. Gabor Mate's new book, yes, it's a very good book, The Myth of Normal. The other book I should mention is this one, The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk. It's all about early life, and it's been on the New York Times bestseller list for 3 years, somewhere in the top 10. And it's all about these early life issues that Gabor addresses so well too. But it suggests that there's a hunger in among American people for trying to understand how early life has affected them. Yes. Well, thank you very much for the opportunity to have presented these ideas, and I'm happy to engage in further discussions and so on. Thanks again.
Thank you. Thank you. And we did get your email in the chat, so people who have other questions
Oh,
could
yeah. Let me make sure I
ask
do
you
that.
that. And then later, when we have breakout rooms, that will be a time to talk about your questions as well as your ideas of what you can do as the people on this call. We're going to have a break now for 15 minutes, and then we're going to hear from a panel of our Mike Yarrow Peace Fellows and see how the young people are working on the idea of economic inequality.